Hi, my name is Sarah Edwards, and for my controversial social issue informative speech, I will be talking about transgender rights. Transgender rights are protect individuals who identify as a gender that is different from the one they were assigned with when they were born. These individuals argue that human rights should apply equally to everyone, including those who are transgender, non-binary, intersex, or cisgender. This is a recent controversial issue because transgender individuals still experience discrimination and hardships today. In almost half of the United States does not have legal protections for LGBTQ plus employees. In June 2020, the Supreme Court made it illegal for employers to fire or discriminate against any employee just because they are LGBTQ plus. This was a 6-3 decision and was a huge victory for transgender rights. Transgender supporters work to strengthen and expand legal protections in schools, the workplace, healthcare, and in the law. People who oppose transgender rights try to push back against the idea that people should have the right to identify as a gender other than the one they were assigned with at birth. The general history of the issue. Transgender people face discrimination in housing, education, the workplace, military service, credit access, and healthcare just because of their gender identity or gender expression. There are 1.4 million transgender adults who live in the United States. Even though transgender individuals have existed for centuries, the national movement to give them civil rights in the United States has only recently taken place within the past year. As stated on thoughtco.com, the 14th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is ratified. The equal protection and due process clauses in Section 1 would implicitly include transgender and transsexual persons, as well as any other identifiable group. Even though the Supreme Court has not made it so the amendment can fully embrace transgender rights, these clauses will form the foundation of rulings in the future. In 2007, the Employment Non-Discrimination Act was signed. As stated in thoughtco.com, gender identity protections are controversially stripped from the 2007 version of the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, but the updates to the legislation ultimately fail. Future versions of ENDA, beginning in 2009, include gender identity protections. Back in June 2020, the Trump administration started moving ahead with the rule that would make it so transgender people were taken out of sex discrimination protections in healthcare. As stated in hrw.org, while advocates fight the rule in court, transgender people will continue to face discriminatory treatments and refusals of care. Even though a United States Supreme Court ruling happened a week prior that made it so there were employment protections for the LGBTQ plus community, saying that gender identity discrimination is a form of sex discrimination that is against the law. The Trump administration still wanted to go ahead with this. The Trump administration has always attacked transgender people, and the rollback of healthcare protections is just the latest. As stated in hrw.org, since 2017, the administration has withdrawn regulatory protections for transgender children in schools, fought recognition of transgender people under federal employment laws, banned transgender people from serving in the military, rolled back protections for transgender people in prisons, and threatened to cut off funding to schools that let transgender girls participate in sports. The administration has been against transgender rights, and it does not look like they will be letting up. The Supreme Court said that sex includes gender identity, and the Equality Act was passed last year, which prohibits anyone from discriminating anyone based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. Recently, there was a proposed rule to undermine the 2016 Equal Access Rule by allowing sex-segregated shelters to discriminate against transgender people. As stated on AmericanProgress.org, the proposal allows those shelters to make placement determinations based solely on biological sex and not gender identity, ignoring clear case law for what constitutes gender identity discrimination and the plain meaning of sex, and erroneously claiming that such placements are not discriminatory. To summarize, this new rule would put an already vulnerable population in danger and put shelters' funding at risk because of the faulty legal ground. This rule is especially concerning because of being in the middle of a coronavirus pandemic and economic fallout. Homelessness and domestic violence is increasing, and transgender people are more likely to be low income and experience trouble with housing. Also, coronavirus lockdowns put transgender people at a big risk of domestic violence. Transgender people face a lot of housing insecurity because of the coronavirus, and transgender people face discrimination way too often. So who does this affect? With the Trump administration wanting to put in new laws that discriminates transgender people, it affects the whole transgender community. A lot of people started taking notice when the trans movement began, but a lot of backlash resulted from that. Social media and the internet have been ways that transgender people can open up and feel safe, talk to others who are possibly going through what they are going through. Within the last decade, trans people have been getting more and more attention. Even though they are becoming more visible, there is still backlash. There are still people who do not accept the reality that sex does not just consist of man and woman. They refuse to accept the fact that there is not just two genders anymore. Gender produces sex. Sex does not produce gender. Even though trans people educate themselves and start to understand more about the trans community, backlash is still given off of the community. So there are some solutions trying to be given. A few months ago, the United States Supreme Court determined that the protections in the Civil Rights Act against discrimination in the workplace based on your sex extends to gay and transgender people too. As stated in nytime.com, days after the Supreme Court decision, the Health Department formally published its modified rules, which raised the question, is the Trump administration's decision to erase Obama-era protections for gay and transgender patients now illegal? The government did not think of the implications of the Supreme Court decision, so the rule would be unlawful. The Trump administration is trying to abolish and replace the Affordable Care Act, and if it were to happen, it would set back the LGBTQ plus community of their rights. As stated in my second source of AmericanProgress.org, within the existence of the entire ACA at stake, potential losses of coverage and health benefits would be detrimental to LGBTQ people, people with disabilities, and communities of color, all of whom have made significant gains under the law's passage. On November 10th, the United States Supreme Court will hear the arguments in California versus Texas, which is the recent attempt by the Trump administration to repeal the Affordable Care Act. Over a long period of time, transgender people have faced so much discrimination. There have been times where there could have been a break, and maybe there have been some good news. But with this news on what the Trump administration wants to do, it makes the whole transgender community and lots of others very vulnerable and very scared.